The presentation will be given by Jennifer Jadin, Ph.D., ecologist, climate advisor, science communicator, and program manager. Jennifer have worked for 13 years post-PhD in ecology on climate change adaptation, especially in the agriculture and forestry sectors. And now she's in the process of becoming a certified regenerative agriculture practitioner. Two recent experiences of Jennifer include designing a permaculture-based reforestation and land rehabilitation program for the Day National Park in Djibouti. The topic of Jennifer's presentation today is rehabilitating war damaged agricultural land through demining, phtyoremedation, and regenerative landscape scale approaches. So, Jennifer, welcome. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Pavlo. I shortened the title just a bit here, but yes, you have the title more or less correct. I do want to note that I'm currently with FAO in Ukraine as the head of planning, focusing on environments and climate. I'm giving this talk to talk about what FAO is doing in the topic of this conference, as well as some of my own personal views on it, which don't necessarily represent those of FAO, though for the most part, this is representative of FAO. So if I can get this. Okay. So FAO, for those of you who don't know, but I assume most do, is the UN specialized technical agency that leads international efforts to end hunger. We have been operating in Ukraine since 2003. We have been largely doing development work in that period of time, with a spike in emergency work in 2014, and then back to more or less development work with some ongoing emergency work way in the east. However, when the full-scale war started a year and a half ago, all of our operations turned to emergency response, except for the development programs that were still ongoing. This is one thing to keep in mind for what we do is that we must align our work with the government and also civil society. We particularly have to align our work with Ministry for Agrarian Policy and Food because they are our line ministry, but we also work with the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, the State Forestry Research Agency, the State Agency for Energy Efficiency, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and others. Of course, we try to instill UN or pass on, I should say, UN and international values, but we also try to align with what the government wants. So for the past year and a half, our operations have been dictated largely by our emergency response program. This emergency response program was aligned with government priorities when it was made last December. And those were to restore food security, improve self-sufficiency in frontline communities. In short, that is the pure emergency response, such as delivering seeds, feed, fodder, tools, animals, etc. The second pillar of our emergency response is restoring critical agricultural production and value chains. So what does that actually mean? That means doing demining of agricultural lands work, land rehabilitation, including some possible phytoremediation work, which I'll talk about later. And then the third part is restoring critical agri-food system services. That includes a lot of things that aren't pertinent to the topic of this conference, but it also does include assessments of damages and losses to the agricultural sector, to natural resources, et cetera. And I'll talk about at least one of those assessments in a bit. However, we are now approaching 2024, and while we will continue to have an emergency response program here, we are looking ahead to the redevelopment of Ukraine and the recovery of Ukraine. So we're in the process of planning what our plan will be we're hoping to have a multi-year plan for the next 3 years. One thing we do know that plan will help Ukraine achieve its goals to become part of the EU. Ministry of Agrarian Policy and Food has already demonstrated its interest in aligning with the Green New Deal, Common Agricultural Policy, and meeting overall environmental requirements. So we hope to help them do that. So that will be one of the sort of guiding pillars, or the pillars don't guide, but a guiding principle of our new strategy. We also hope to build a circular agri-food economy that generates energy, reduces greenhouse gases and waste, uses systems approach to plan and manage the agriculture, food, and natural resources management sectors, and also digitization to improve transparency, monitoring, and efficiency. And this is, again, definitely per government requests. So I'm sure this has been said before in this conference, but the reconstruction of Ukraine must be green. Why is that? For one, as I just stated, Ukraine has ambitions to become part of the EU, and that means aligning with many EU environmental policies. But besides from that, it's just sort of the obvious thing to do. It's what civil society is calling for. It's what parts of the government, it's what academics are calling for. It's what the international society is calling for. These were just a few screen grabs I did of various stories that have come out of both international and domestic press about how Ukraine needs to go on a green reconstruction path. Another reason, even if there was not a war right now, that Ukraine needs to start turning towards green recovery is because of the threats to Ukraine due to climate change, which, again, I'm sure has been said many times during this conference. These are two screen grabs from very recent articles published in 2023. There actually were several more along this topic. I just couldn't fit them on the screen. One is called Evidence for and Projection of Multi-Breadbasket Failure Caused by Climate Change. This article discussed the failure of Ukraine as a breadbasket, as well as the US and parts of Asia. Risk of synchronized low yields are underestimated in climate and crop model predictions. So I know right now, we're in the agricultural sector, we're all very concerned with exporting grains and getting the Black Sea grain corridor opened again. But the reality is also that we need to be concerned about what we're producing on the lands in Ukraine, and whether we're producing the right things in the right ways, because they're right now, I know I know Ukraine has an excess of grains because they can't get out, but in the near future, it's hard to say what Ukraine will be able to produce. There have been dust storms, the black soil is blowing away, and the ability for Ukraine to keep producing like it has in the past is going to be diminished, and it's going to continue diminishing under climate change. So FAO, and the topic of this conference was landscape work in light of the war. And I wanted to talk a bit about, what, not talk, but quickly show what work FAO has done in this sector. So FAO has a strategy on climate change. We have long worked on conservation agriculture. Here's another, on the right side is the state of the world's land and resources for food and agriculture, which was written just 2 years ago, which again does talk about sort of a systemic approach to land and water use. Climate smart agriculture. This one, transforming food and agriculture to achieve the SDGs, talks quite a bit about a bunch of principles that are germane to permaculture and regenerative agriculture. And then here's an article back from 2003 showing that FAO was already promoting conservation agriculture back then. I want to state that FAO doesn't specifically have its own intellectual property or works on regenerative agriculture or permaculture. However, on the FAO website, we do support under family farms is the title, a lot of work from others on regenerative agriculture and conservation agriculture. So there's sort of a database of work that you can go to that's updated regularly. And then under agroecological approaches, permaculture is discussed quite extensively. And again, there's a database of partners, publications that can be referred to on the FAO website. Okay. So anyway, so FAO does work in this sector quite obviously. I personally would like to see us do even more, especially in Ukraine. And again, I'll say I in this case, because we have a lot of work to do here. And I said we have to align with the government, which is, also understandably wants emergency response. But anyway, so what have we already been doing in this topic? Well, I believe one of my colleagues spoke about this a bit earlier this week, so I'll kind of go through it quickly. But we just recently closed out a global environmental facility round 7 project, in which we did many things related to conservation, agriculture, and land degradation. One was a shelter belts inventory across many parts of the country, not all of the country. We only focused in something like 4 to 6 oblasts, but we looked at where shelter belts existed, where they've been degraded, and where they needed to be restored most urgently. We also produced shelter belts guidance. Sorry, getting a phone call. And part of that shelter belts guidance was to recommend the kinds of trees and shrubs that needed to be built, need to be planted, I'm sorry, to make an effective shelter belt, as well as the types of fruits and nuts that could be grown within the shelter belt to improve the agroforestry to make it an agroforest and to improve the productivity, and then also the types of woods that would be best, or types of trees and wood that would be best grown that could be used for sustainable harvesting, and then further use for building materials or whatever. We also did a lot of work on conservation agriculture. So we did a survey and analysis of existing conservation agriculture in the country. We had experts in Kherson, Mykolaiv, Odessa, Kyiv, and Zhytomyr. Apologies if I pronounced that one wrong. We developed and evaluated farmer experiments on no-till. We helped farmers do research on organic no-till agriculture, and then also we calculated greenhouse gas emissions from conservation agriculture. So we taught specialists to do this, and then we did comparisons of the emissions from conservation versus other types of agriculture. So that's to say, as I'm sure everyone here knows, that conservation agriculture is already has taken a foothold, or more than a foothold, in Ukraine, and that's great. And we, through this project and through ongoing projects, are really trying to expand that as quickly as possible. Another thing that we did under the Jeff 7 project was we created a database of 58 farmers who already worked on conservation agriculture. These were our conservation agriculture heroes. And we took farmers around to their farms so they could be the teachers. So teacher training, train the trainer approach, and using actual local farmers as trainers, which was great. We always want to take a bottom-up approach, and this helped us do that. We also have produced some field guides and texts. I believe one field guide, or 2 field guides, and 1 actual textbook. Those are in the process right now of being printed and distributed. And then we are currently, this is just a screenshot from Prometheus, but we're currently in the process of developing an online course in conservation agriculture in Ukrainian. And as far as I know, and as far as I've been told by my colleagues, it will be the first course on conservation agriculture that's actually in Ukrainian. Of course, they exist world over in other languages. But we hope that this will be one small step in expanding the use of conservation, regenerative agriculture, whatever you want to call it. I know they have slightly different techniques and goals, but we sort of call them, within FAO, we stick with the phrase conservation agriculture because that is what we've been doing for a long time, but fully understand that regenerative is sort of the new buzzword, and it has a different approach. So hopefully, as we keep evolving our techniques and our materials, we will shift or use both of them. Some other current work we're doing. So we have a large ongoing program between FAO and World Food Program. It is a demining and land rehabilitation program. So as you may know, government estimates suggest that something like 25,000 square kilometers are estimated to potentially be contaminated with mines and unexploded ordnance. Now, potentially means this includes zones that were under conflict, but and maybe have trenches in them, but aren't actually known to be mined. So we our project works in 3 oblasts. We're working first in Kharkiv. Next, we'll be moving to Mykolaiv and then Kherson. And what we are doing first is we are with the Ukrainian research societies. We're mapping compacted and bombed soils, bombed turbated. That's the first component. The second component is part 2 is we mark the land, we work with WFP in that case through their demining partner to do non-technical surveys, interviews with the community to find out where they believe mines and unexploded ordnance were, where fighters were, etc. And from those interviews, we were able to mark some lands as likely clear right away, some as likely clear, which hopefully we can go over quite quickly with rollers or some other technique, and then ones that we're fairly certain that are mined, which will be cordoned off for, frankly, probably years, because it takes a very long time to do this demining. While our demining partners are doing that, FAO comes back in soils that are safe to touch to test for the structure, chemicals, and organics in the soil. We are currently expanding our soil mapping, our soil testing program, but I can say from one indicative test we had good and bad news, more good. We tested a site where there had been explosion of, I don't know what kind of ordnance it was, if it was a mine or a rocket. And while the levels of cadmium in particular were a bit too high, at least by Ukrainian standards, they were not terrible. And that means that that soil might be usable right away or usable after maybe only one round of remediation. However, we did find in a helicopter crash site that the levels of cadmium and some other toxic compounds were 20 or more times higher than they should be. However, that's good news because helicopter crashes are going to be much, much rarer than explosions of ordnance in the soil. So that means hopefully relatively little soil will have to be remediated. And then the part 3 of this project is to support livelihoods, or which we're exploring different ways of doing that. That might be giving cash and vouchers to people just to support their lives. It might be helping them pay land rent. We're really not sure yet. It depends on what each individual farmer needs. And then if possible, helping retrain farmers and households to do regenerative agriculture, permaculture, conservation agriculture, whatever you want to call it, but agricultural techniques that help rehabilitate the soil that, even if not filled with organic compounds, has likely been compacted or degraded over the years, and we're hoping to help transition them. And in the areas we're working in Kharkiv, already farmers have expressed a lot of interest in this, and in fact, many of them were already doing no-till agriculture. So back to the first part, just an example of what our partner is able to do. So this is not an actual map from the project. This was an exemplar map from Kievska Hromada. But this map that the Ukrainian Research Societies produced, so this shows all of the bomb turbation, the red dots, and then each dot, the size is indicative, or the size is shown by the size of the dot. Then the yellow is contamination zones, and then the green and gray show different levels of contamination. So the light green is very little, no sign of contamination. The darker green is less than 5%, etc. What we can do, and this is already helping us guide our soil testing, is based upon the size of the crater, we can estimate what kind of ordnance likely went off in it. If it's a very big crater, it's going to be some sort of missile. If it's a very small crater, it's probably a mine, or shells will be different size. And so based on that information, with our military liaison, we're kind of able to estimate what might be in the soil, and that guides our soil testing. This is just another, this is a zoom in of the same map. So you can see that it is, it's overlaid with the cadastre. And again, it's zooming in to show contamination zones, bomb turbation zones, craters, settlement boundaries, Fermata boundaries. Oops, I think I just turned the wrong way. Okay, and then this this map shows where there's a likely heavy risk of heavy metal infiltration and a moderate risk of infiltration. And then there is another map, which I believe I don't have here, in which our partners are able to look at surface water flows and estimate where potential contaminants have flowed to, so that we know what parts of the landscape we might need to test, even if they weren't specifically bombed themselves. So this is just a couple of pictures of our team doing some of the soil testing, walking out in fields, which have been bomb turbated at some point in time, but are known to be clear of mines. So then what happens when we're testing them? So we're working with the Sokolovsky Institute to test soils for, like I said, for heavy metals and organic pollutants. If they're found to be acceptable levels, they will be right away released for production. If they're not found to be at acceptable levels, that is where we have a debate as to what to do. In many circumstances, of course, you can just take off the top layer of the soil, but as I'm sure most of you know, phytoremediation was used successfully around Chernobyl, and there is a possibility of using that again. And in particular, what we'd like to experiment with on the small scale is doing biofuels for phytoremediation, because we would like the farmer to own the land, to still be able to be productive off the land, and not let it just sit barren. And there are ways of many different biofuels, sunflowers for one, but many others can phytoremediate the soil, and then they can either be turned directly into biofuels and used with filters, or in the case of sunflowers, you can still sell the seeds, but then you have to just get rid of the stems and treat them as a toxic waste. But these are still at the idea phase, and we really need to see how much land we have to work with, because this project just started 3 months ago. We're mostly done with mapping Kharkiv, but we haven't started with we've started with the soil testing, but we haven't done full soil testing yet. Okay, as I just said, phytoremediation trials with biofuels, one possibility. Also in those areas where there is not a lot of chemical contamination, we already have funding from multiple donors to start regenerative agriculture training and trials. Again, this is going to be limited by how much land is actually free of mines, and is definitely marked clear. But we hope to start some small training programs and procure seeds and tools necessary to help farmers transition away from traditional heavy agriculture, conventional agriculture, to a regenerative approach that, like I said, even if there aren't chemical contaminants, it can restore the quality from compaction and years of degradation. Okay, so other impacts of war on the environment that we are going to try to address. So impacts of the dam disaster. As some of you I'm sure know, the Kakhovka Reservoir was the largest, it's reported the largest irrigation system in Europe. It irrigated 95% of Khersonska, 75% of Zaporizhzhia, and 30% of Dnipropetrovska. We have done a post-disaster needs assessment. When I say we, I mean the UN and the government together. This is about to be launched soon. Because it's not officially launched, I can't really talk too much about what's in it, but I will give a few of our results from it. We do know that over 26% of the national fishing was done in the reservoir and in the delta. We know that the fisheries losses are in many millions. We know that 3,500 tons of urea ammonia fertilizer is likely to have been damaged and flowed out into the delta, as well as all of the toxic sediments at the bottom of the reservoir that have been collecting for years. Oops. Okay. Some of the things we do know from our needs assessment is that, 800,000 hectares of croplands were impacted by loss of the reservoir. As I said, it was the largest irrigation system in Europe. Currently, data as of really just last month, 9,000 hectares are already under severe water stress, and we expect that 248,000 more hectares will be impacted. The region receives an annual precipitation of about 52 centimeters, so it's on the cusp of the semi-arid area. So it does really need irrigation or techniques that conserve the water. The area is sandy soils, and because of the proximity to the sea, it is subject to salinization and alkalization. Boreholes, which some are suggesting as a way to cope with the irrigation loss, is not the solution because it is just going to make the salinization worse. And I can't read the bottom of my slide here because of this bar. But, oh yes, I think I know what it says. And this area was the main supplier of fruits and vegetables for the country. So this could be a food security issue if we can't get this area up and farming again, or if there is severe drought. So again, this area is in the area of the steppe, which is just traditionally grasslands with small forests or lines of trees among water. Steppe forest should have larger patches of forest. Much of this land, as I showed the pictures earlier, already is degrading. This is because of large-scale conventional agriculture, over-tilling, all of the reasons that you're all aware of. Also the loss of shelter belts. So, sorry, I kind of skipped a slide in here, but what I was going to say here and what I'll get back to later is we are trying to promote a large-scale landscape approach to dealing with this problem, with the loss of the irrigation water from the reservoir, which is to include regenerative agriculture, which can use, as you know, many techniques to keep water in the soil, as well as restoration of forests. We are in part going to be doing this under a new program called Resilient Ukrainian Steppe, combating change, meaning climate change and change from the war, through landscape scale forest management. We're working on this project with the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, as well as the State Forestry Research Agency. The idea is it's also a Jeff-funded project again. There'd be 3 components to it. One is forestry policy, one is science and action, and then the third one would be financial support and communications, all framed with our standard Jeff monitoring. We hope to work on restoring shelter belts and forests in the steppe forest area, but mostly in the steppe in the area impacted by the loss of the Kakova Reservoir. In those forests, this is a continuation actually of our past Jeff project, using lessons learned from there to do agroforestry, both within the shelter belts and more widely as accepted and wanted by landowners. And then within those areas that are really dedicated agricultural land, transitioning them as much as possible to regenerative agriculture. So taking really a whole landscape approach, looking at large chunks of land that were impacted by the reservoir and using all of these techniques to try to keep more water in the soil, allow people to continue to grow, use it productively, return parts of it to nature, and hopefully bring back some biodiversity. Okay. As I said, we, as we talk to our donors, many of them are interested in supporting wider scale regenerative agriculture, and we could include permaculture, conservation agriculture under that approaches for Ukraine. So this is a topic that we are continually trying to find funding for, and also developing our work program on and doing our outreach on, so that we can expand this as much as possible, not just in response to the war and the loss of the dam, but also more widely as it's needed. I also think when we're talking about landscapes, we need to not forget that 55% of the world's population resides in urban areas, and urban landscapes and rural landscapes are intricately tied. FAO has globally a green cities approach. The green cities approach is largely about greening cities and greening peri-urban areas, putting in forests and parks and city gardens and growing food within cities and peri-urban areas. But I think we also need to think about the links between the landscapes around the cities, the natural landscapes, and what kinds of value chains we have going to them, what kinds of sustainable patterns of production and consumption we are encouraging within the cities, and how we can reduce pressure on the landscape surrounding them as a result of that. Overall, I'd say that, we would like to also see a circular economy approach here. And this is, we also have some programs that have already been done and are under development regarding waste to energy, which I'm not going to talk about. That's not so relevant to the exact topic of this conference. But I've put in these blue boxes here to highlight ways that we think FAO can contribute to a circular economy in Ukraine. And one is by helping production and manufacturing use green energy, particularly through biogas, but also because that biogas that uses agricultural waste. But also through a more standard green energy, such as wider scale solar distribution, wider scale wind. That's not a topic we work on so much, but we are particularly interested in seeing how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from rotting food products and rotting agricultural products, and actually turn it into usable energy through biogas digesters. Distribution, per request of the government and per FAO's own skill set, we are hoping to help agriculture have better digital linkages so that products can get to the markets and the marketers that need them, so that can reduce food loss and waste and improve efficiency of environmental use. Promoting sustainable consumption patterns within cities. This might mean many things, which are way outside of the scope of FAO. One could be, and this is not an, I'll be very clear, this is not an FAO policy, but one could be promoting less consumption of meat and dairy products, which are quite hard on the environment. Digital linkages for collection. Again, many countries around the world have applications and websites in which, if you have extra food, you can give it to people that need it, that want it, that'll be able to use it as food, as compost, whatever. And it would be great to support things like that here. Recycling, again, not only do biogas digesters make energy, but they also make digestate, which does emit greenhouse gases, yes, but it emits a lot fewer than manure on its own does. And so turning digestate into organic fertilizers, as well as compost from cities and rural areas, and using that as fertilizers, and getting the country off of chemical fertilizers as much as possible would be great. And as I said, waste to energy. So I guess I think this is my last slide or so, but I'm sure, again, this has been said many times before in this conference, but with crisis comes opportunity. It is, of course, needless to say that this war is unnecessary and tragic, and just really a waste of money, energy, and time and lives for everyone. But if we want to see one ray of light coming out of it, is that the international community is, of course, much more focused on Ukraine right now. We within the UN, we rely on donor funds, and we are seeing a lot of donor funds. Tons of donor funds came in last year to do emergency work, but we're seeing a shift in donor funds. In some cases, it's less, but in some cases, it's just a shift to other countries around the world recognizing that Ukraine has a window now where it can recover and redevelop in a green way. And particularly EU countries are supporting green redevelopment. And hopefully investors will also see, private investors private sector investors will also see this as a great opportunity to really transition Ukraine away from the old style of doing things to a new modern era where it can be a leader in Europe in the agricultural natural resources sectors. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for this wonderful presentation, and also for all efforts that FAO was doing and is doing and in Ukraine. And our participants also admire FAO efforts in shelter belt restoration. However, they express concern and ask question: is either FAO is going to run any statewide awareness raising campaigns on shelter belts, because I mean that you know better than me probably about the importance of shelter belts in terms of providing different ecosystem services, but we need to communicate it very, very well and wide to farmers. Are there any such initiatives of really wide scale from FAO?
So during the Jeff project, which, like I said, recently closed, it was finished, there was certainly an attempt to do this widely, but I believe our work was limited to 4 or 5 oblasts, and then the size of the scope of that work got cut down quite a bit once the war started. So there was some communication about it. Was it a wide scale communication and marketing campaign? No. And I personally, as someone who works in science communication, would love to do that, but that's not really FAO's thing, is to do. We don't do large scale communications. Like, you know, some of the UN agencies, UNICEF does this, WHO does this, but we don't. However, in our like I said, we're doing this course in conservation agriculture, and we're hoping to continue to drum up funding to do landscape restoration work that's focused on regenerative agriculture, shelter belts, etc. And as more funding comes in for that, we will fit in as much communication as we can, you know, and on a sort of a personal level, or but not, I shouldn't say personal level, but maybe institutional level rather than a large scale campaign. And also during, like I said, we're designing a new Jeff project, and we will have a communications component in that. And we're hoping that the communications component this time will be bigger than it was last time. Because yes, we fully understand the importance of shelter belts, and understand that many Ukrainian landowners do not understand the importance of them.
Thank you very much. So now I invite participants to unmute yourself and ask questions. Should you have any? And while we are waiting for questions, I will ask mine. Is there FAO is planning any work on developing restoration strategies for different scenarios? I'm now calling about restoration strategies of war damaged landscapes, because this was widely discussed at our conference, and we agreed that this scenario should involve both restoration of agricultural lands, but as well as like war wilding or rewilding, as you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, and production of bioenergy, crop and agroforestry, and communication between ecologists, agricultural scientists, economists at least. So we understand the scale of this effort is so huge, and our concern is which organization is going to lead this strategic work. Is FAO going to lead this strategic work or not?
I would say that is still to be determined. We certainly would like to have a role in it. However, our role does end at the agricultural sector, which includes fisheries and forestry, but does not include protected areas. So if the UN is to take this on, it would be it would be a joint effort probably between UNEP and FAO. And we have engaged in talks with them to see how we can work together. But unfortunately, the reality is everything that the UN wants to do is always limited by donor funds, where we do not have an endless source of funds. And so if we don't have donors that want to work on something, we're hampered in our ability to do it. And we do have limited internal funding where we can do our own things. But so in short, the answer is regarding the Kakova Dam area and the loss of irrigation, yes, through the project we are working on right now and working on designing, we are going to do whole-scale landscape rehabilitation plans. That's sort of the point. But beyond the confines of that project, we have not committed to anything yet. Though certainly would like to and have the capabilities to if we work with another organization that works more in the environmental sector. And then, as you know, each ministry here in Ukraine, I don't need to tell all of you this, but has different mandates. And the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, I think, doesn't particularly see its mandate as agricultural areas and vice versa. And so we, as an environmental community, I think, need to figure out how to bridge that divide and make sure that those agencies are working together. And this is not a problem. This is not an issue unique to Ukraine. I know this exists world over, but getting one to recognize that those two parts of the environment cannot be looked at in isolation is really important.
Thank you. I just want to highlight, like, from our perspectives as researchers from different disciplines, that it's very important to do a good science behind developing these strategies. Because, for example, if we are talking about restoration of Kakhovka Reservoir, there is a lot of debates and even speculations between agronomists and ecologists, and we heard actually our participants mostly agreed on that there should be no restoration of Kakhovka Reservoir in that state as it was, at least because it is prone to any subsequent war damage and huge consequences for both ecology and agriculture. So we should really do very good science, systematic reviews, and develop innovative scenarios. And of course, it's need a lot of work and a lot of money. So we are a little bit, or we quite worried who should make this effort in Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would not say, so we will, it's hard to say what this project is doing because we're still under the development phase of it. But ideally, the first stage would be doing a very comprehensive assessment of not the reservoir, because we're FAO and the team that's working on this is not going to make that decision about whether or not the reservoir needs to be refilled or not. We're concerned with the land that was being irrigated by it, but the land that was never flooded in the first place, right? That was natural, in quotes. And so, yeah, the first step in that would be doing a comprehensive assessment to see soil testing, what the possibilities are, what the landowners are willing to do, what they can be convinced to do, and really just what the right approach is given the current climatic conditions and the predicted climatic changes, as well as the economic needs, and trying to balance that out with the environmental needs. If it was up to me, we'd rewild everything, but it's not up to me. So
I see. Okay, we have 1 minute. If there anyone has a short question, please go ahead. Maybe then I will ask this hopefully short question. How FAO would ensure that the help on land rehabilitation will go to small and family farmers, which is in line to our European integration efforts?
So there's 2 ways we do that. One is we, as you may know, we, along with World Bank, help set up the State Agrarian Registry, the SAR. And so when people ask for help, we put out calls to the SAR to offer help or to find out where people want to be helped. And so from that, for example, in our demining work, people will apply for demining, but if they are too large of a farm, if they don't qualify as a small farm, we can't work with them per our own mandates. We can continue to use the SAR for any other project we do, and we will. We use it all the time. Regarding rural households, most rural households are not registered in the SAR, even though they're welcome to. And so they're a bit of a trickier one to capture. However, we do partner with other UN agencies that do emergency response to small households or to rural households. And of course, we do ourselves. But for example, when we work with WFP, we can help, we can do surveys through WFP of the people that they are delivering food and services to, or food and cash to, I should say. And so by having those lists of rural households that are in need, that's a way that we can make sure that we're reaching those people. And of course, we have teams on the ground. We have an office in Dnipro, and they already have networks in Dnipropetrovsk, for example, as well as Kherson and Mykolaiv, I believe, because they've been working there. So we already have lists of stakeholders, but anytime we do a new project, we would just go out and do field surveys to make sure that we're capturing as many people as possible, in addition to the SAR.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. We do hope to establish more cooperation with FAO and be more successful in our landscape restoration efforts. So thank you very much for your time.
I do too, and we certainly hope to work with a lot of civil society actors because you are the people that are making Ukraine change. We are just trying to enable.
Thank you very much.